Abraham Lincoln warned that the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. Would you like to know what's being taught in today's classrooms? Welcome to Say What? With attorney Mark Schneider and Pastor George Rosca Jr. They'll explore the issues facing children, parents, and society as a result of the public schools and the forces behind them. Say What is the radio program of Protect Our Kids, which seeks to inform and equip concerned citizens about the looming crisis in American education. So listen in as your hosts, Mark Schneider and George Rosca Jr., unpack the issues and organizations affecting our children. And now here's your hosts, Mark Schneider and George Rosca Jr.
Hello everyone, I'm George Rosca.
And I'm Mark Schneider.
And we want to welcome you to today's episode 151 of Say What, where we talk about the threats to our children in the public school system, including the nationwide phenomenon of schools now aiding and abetting gender mutilation and transitioning of minors and hiding it from parents.
Yeah, George, I'm just continually shocked that most parents are still unaware that this is happening in the nation's schools, but it is. The evidence is everywhere, and it's not hard to find. And so we thought we would dedicate today's program about once again shedding light on this terrible phenomena that's going on in our schools. And where it really starts has to do with what are called parental secrecy policies. In fact, we mentioned this in our last episode. They're also called gender support plans. And what they do is they authorize school systems to keep parents in the dark about their child's gender identity, medical services that they may be receiving to start the transition process, including puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, starting at the age of 12. But it even goes deeper than that. If you could go deeper than that, it authorizes schools to keep a set of double books. One set of books that parents have access to, another set of books that the school system keeps to themselves to relate to the particular child. And this came to light, George, with a case that is still going through the court system here in California called Regino versus Chico Unified School District. In this case, and by the way, there are 23 schools in that district, so it's a sizable school district. Miss Regino's fifth grade elementary school daughter was encouraged by a school counselor to adopt a male identity. And immediately after a brief conversation, a counselor walked this child back to her class and informed her teacher about this child's new identity and instructed that she was now to be called by the name of her new identity that she happened to take on. So as soon as the child expressed that, I'm thinking that I'm kind of feeling like a boy, the school system took over from there. Thereafter, all the school staff began calling the child by the new name. And over the following months, the district used the child's male name and pronouns while at school, and the school counselor provided the child with additional information about continuing her transition to a male identity. And George, all of this was, of course, deliberately hidden from the child's mother. Now, since this lawsuit was started, the child has enrolled in a different school and is now identified happily with its biological gender. So the crisis has been averted. But when Miss Regino asked for justification for this policy that the Chico School District had, the school district referred her to an FAQ link from the California Department of Education. And this link specifically regarded the bathroom bill, Assembly Bill 1266, which if you read the bill has absolutely nothing to do with keeping parents in the dark about their child's sexual identity. All that bill does was it opens up bathrooms for children who identify with the opposite sex. So after the lawsuit, Chico Unified School Board, this is after it went public. You'd think they would be embarrassed about their policy. and say, oh, we're sorry. We got caught. Mea culpa. Parents, forgive us. We're not going to keep you in the dark anymore. No, George, they actually took a vote to uphold its parental secrecy policy, and they've doubled down on it. Attorney General Rob Bonta got behind not only Chico Unified School District, but it sent letters out to school districts. He sent letters out to school districts across the state telling them, you have every right to keep parents in the dark. And in fact, I'm encouraging you to do just that.
Yeah. This is absolute craziness. And in fact, I would even venture to say that the drafters of the bathroom bill legislation in 2013 never even thought for once, because the language wasn't even around back then, for gender support plans. There was no such concept.
That's right. That's right. Well, we're going to look at this link that was provided, Miss Regino, from the Chico Unified School District. It's still up, by the way, on the site, so you can look at it. This is the California Department of Education provided a Q&A link, and one of the questions on the Q&A link is, may a student's gender identity be shared with the student's parents, other students, or members of the public? So this is a link for school officials, teachers, board members of school districts to know how to handle these things when they occur. So this is one of the questions. May a student's gender identity be shared with a student's parents? And here's the response. The right of transgender students to keep their transgender status private is grounded in California's anti-discrimination laws, as well as federal and state laws. They don't cite any of those laws, George.
They're bluffing.
Not one. The CDC also cites Education Code 49060, which requires that schools keep student records private. But if you read this code section, it has to do with public funding of education for the disabled. It has nothing to do with gender identity privacy.
Goes on, right, to talk about FERPA, which is the Family Educational and Privacy Rights.
Right.
And FERPA is a federal law that similarly protects the privacy of students' education records. FERPA provides that schools may only disclose information in school records with written permission from a student's parents or from the student after the student reaches the ages of 18. But again, nothing to do with gender identity.
Absolutely nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. FERPA is a common sense bill. We're not going to give school records out to anybody who wants them. You've got to have a legitimate reason. Parents have access to them. It doesn't have anything to do with gender identity. They also cite, George, in the Q&A, the California Constitution. Here's what they say. Minors enjoy a right to privacy under Article 1, Section 1 of the California Constitution that's enforceable against private parties and government officials. The right to privacy encompasses the right to non-disclosure as well as in collection and dissemination of personal information such as medical records and gender identity. But George, here's what Article 1, Section 1 of the California Constitution actually says. This is a quote. All people are by nature free and independent and have unalienable rights. Sounds like the Declaration of Independence. Among these are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining safety, happiness, and privacy. George, that's the whole thing. Does that sound like it gives public school officials the right to secretly transition their parents' children?
This is ludicrous.
Well, then there's another question on the same CDE FAQ website, and here's the question. What steps should a school or school district take to protect a transgender or gender nonconforming student's right to privacy? And the answer is schools must consult with a transgender student to determine who can or will be informed of the student's transgender status, if anyone, including the student's family. But George, this violates a parent's constitutional right to control the upbringing of their children.
This is a big say what moment. I mean, this is getting crazier and crazier. The next question, what is a school or school district's obligation when a student's stated gender identity is different than the student's gender marker in the school's or district's official records?
That's the question and the answer.
Oh my goodness. If a student so chooses, district personnel shall be required to address the student by a name and the pronouns consistent with the student's gender identity without the necessity of legal documentation or a change to the student's official district record. The student's age is not a factor. For example, children as early as age 2 are expressing a different gender identity.
Do you happen to know any 2-year-olds that are expressing a different gender identity?
It is strongly suggested that teachers privately ask transgender or gender nonconforming students, I guess as young as 2, at the beginning of the school year how they want to be addressed in class, in correspondence to the home, or at conferences with the student's parents.
And it goes on to say, if a member of the school community intentionally uses a student's incorrect name and pronoun or persistently refuses to respect a student's chosen name and pronouns, that conduct should be treated as harassment. Depending on the circumstances, the school's failure to address known incidents of that type of harassment may violate California's anti-discrimination laws. But again, George, they don't say which ones because there aren't any. Well, George, what could be the harm of these parental secrecy policies? What could go wrong?
Exactly. I mean, 2-year-olds, right? You know, in daycare, getting their, pull-ups changed, and yet they know better than the adults in the room. Well, first of all, it authorizes young children to make potentially life-altering decisions without a parent's knowledge or consent.
It's happening, ladies and gentlemen. This is happening across the country, not just in California, but all over the nation. It arrogates to school officials the authority to make these decisions on behalf of parents.
Number 2, you mentioned that. It also assumes parents are not fit to make decisions in the best interests of their children. So, we're given so many, I guess we're given these rights. We're not. These are already ours. We've talked a lot about parental rights. But when it comes to the assumptions that these Marxist legislatures are making, they're assuming that a minor child has certain rights, which they don't, because children belong to parents. They don't belong to the state. And parents, we were made to sign forms, release forms, including some bullet points on there saying, if your child gets hurt, can we give him a Tylenol? If your child gets hurt, what kind of, treatment are we allowed to give? Up to what point? Can we just give them a Band-Aid? Can we put antibacterial disinfectant on them? Can we actually wrap their stuff up with, medical, gauze and other stuff? They give you all of these levels of medical treatment, and yet here, they're not even requiring or asking for any of that.
So you need to get a parent's permission to give the child an aspirin, but not to give them puberty blocker, Lupron, or cross-sex hormones, or therapy and counseling to transition their sex. You can't make this up. Another harm, it conceals information from parents regarding their own child's emotional and mental health, and it gives school officials the authority to engage in psychological and worldview indoctrination of kids without parental consent or knowledge, often, George, by untrained activists, not professional counselors. Just about anybody can do this.
Well, and especially these days, Mark, a lot of, we see these on TikTok videos, right? These activist teachers, right? What do they know about raising kids? They don't even want to have kids, right? Most of them, talking about their, dink status and other things, right? So how in the world do they know better than we as parents?
And once again, these parental secrecy policies, according to the California Department of Education, are ostensibly based, the guidelines for how to respond to these, on AB 1266, the bathroom bill. None of this has the force of law. And it is being challenged in court, and I expect good things to happen from it. But this is the way the school districts are still operating. And we have recent evidence of the harms of these parental secrecy policies. And to prove the point that this is not just in California, we have a brief video clip of some parents that were taking their child what they thought was going to be an informative field trip to the nation's capital and to Pennsylvania. Why don't we hear about their experience? This is Serena and Joe Wales.
Joe and Serena Wales, you're the parents of a 6th grader, an 11-year-old, who was recently involved in an incident that might be many parents' nightmare. Serena, we'll start with you. What was this school trip that you were on?
We signed up for this trip about 18 months before we went on it, and it was a district-sponsored trip to Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. The kids had just learned about the birthplace of our great country, and so it was a chance for them to go back and see some of the wonderful sites that created it. We planned this trip for a while. We woke up at 1:30 that morning in order to go to the airport and get there. We spent the afternoon at Valley Forge and then spent the evening in Philadelphia. Our daughter was very adamant. She knew she had 2 roommates in her room that were going to be from her school and 1 roommate that was going to be outside of her school that she didn't know prior to the trip. And so she really wanted to make that student feel comfortable. So she went out of her way to say, I'll be her bedmate. We'll ride the bus. We'll have lunch together that day. That's just how she, wanted to go about this. She had made up her mind before the trip. And so, when she was in her room that night, just before going to bed, and this other student, there was 3 of them sitting on the bed talking, and they were sharing information about themselves. And that's when this other student, who was going to be her bedmate, informed her that she was transgender and born a boy.
So your daughter, how did she react to that?
So it made her very uncomfortable to realize that she would be sharing a bed with a biological boy. She went into the bathroom. I was down in the lobby at that point. I was on the trip. I was not a chaperone. Our daughter's 11. I didn't feel like she needed to be cross country without one of us present, just because, they're still so young. And she called me. Her voice was quivering. She was very uncomfortable. She was nervous and she was scared. She didn't want to make any of the other kids feel uncomfortable. So I think that's why she was in the bathroom. And she said, Mom, I've got something to tell you. My bedmate just informed me that he's a boy.
Imagine getting that conversation when you're miles away from your child. You can't do much about it, and all of a sudden they're sleeping in the same bed with someone of the opposite gender, a child.
It's scary. It's scary, and it's why I would never allow my daughter to ever get into a public school.
And it doesn't stop there, George. So here's an article that is from the Daily Signal just recently. This is from New York. Mom sues school district for socially transitioning a 12-year-old without parental consent. This was a family who had transplanted from Greece legally, and their 12-year-old daughter, Jane, was trying to learn the English language, trying to fit into a whole new culture and a new school. And lo and behold, they discovered that their daughter was exhibiting signs of anxiety and depression. And the mother repeatedly asked the school district employees about whether they had noticed anything troubling her daughter, but were met with denials and assurances that the daughter was fine. In fact, this went on over and over again for weeks and maybe months. The same counselor instructed school staff to treat Mrs. Vitsaki's daughter as though she were a boy by referring to her with a boy's name and the third person plural pronouns they and them. Then a school psychologist who told school staff to keep their actions secret from Mrs. Vitsaki began meeting with Jane regularly without the parents' knowledge. The school staff carefully used Jane's given name and female pronouns when speaking with Mrs. Vitsaki, and they repeatedly said everything was fine. Well, finally, George, this went on for months when they were secretly transitioning. this daughter. And another staff member at the school, the complaint says, could no longer stomach the deception that the New York school system was imposing on the parents and urged the principal to tell Jane's mother. When the principal finally did, Miss Vitsaki was shocked, the complaint says. And by the way, Alliance Defending Freedom is representing her in this legal case. And the complaint says she and her husband, Jane's father, met with representatives of the school district. They directed the school district to stop taking any further action without their consent and sought open communication. But the principal told them the school district policy required its employees to deceive them. And despite assurances to the contrary, the deception continued, which forced her to get legal counsel and file a lawsuit.
Wow, this is absolutely horrendous. Horrendous. And it's happening all over the country. We just gave you two very brief examples, and the third one up front out of Chico. But Mark, we do have some good news.
There is some guarded good news. Fortunately, parents like Mrs. Vitsaki and Mrs. Regina are challenging these bogus laws and these parental secrecy policies. One included two teachers that were actually terminated for refusing to use a child's preferred pronoun in the school system. And this resulted in the lawsuit of Elizabeth Mirability and Lori Ann West versus Mark Olson, president of the Escondido Unified School District. Well, in that preliminary injunction on the parental secrecy policy, a favored judge of ours, Judge Roger T. Benitez, who's a United States District Judge, in his preliminary injunction against this policy, said these words, George. The school's policy, this parental secrecy policy, is a trifecta of harm. It harms the child who needs parental guidance and possibly mental health intervention to determine if the incongruence is organic or whether it is the result of bullying, peer pressure, or a fleeting impulse, which often they are. It harms the parents by depriving them of the long-recognized 14th Amendment right to care, guide, and make healthcare decisions for their children. And finally, it harms plaintiffs who are compelled to violate the parents' rights by forcing plaintiffs to conceal information they feel is critical for the welfare of their students, violating plaintiffs' religious beliefs. Well, George, just recently added as defendants to this lawsuit is California Governor Newsom and its Attorney General Ram Bonta. And that's good news. So now they're going to be held accountable. The message being, George, parents, you need to be vigilant about what's going on with your children in the public school system. Don't assume that they are your allies, because the law, at least the way it's being misconstrued by public school officials, isn't working against you.
Parents, we have to fight like never before. This is our time to stand. And so we encourage you, please join the ranks of Protect Our Kids. Go to our website at protectourkidsnow.org. Share our videos, download our brochures and pamphlets. We have toolkits for parents, for teachers, for pastors even, on how to start an alternative school within your local church. We need to get our kids out now. You've just heard one egregious thing, but there are many, many things that are happening in our public school systems that are just destroying our kids and the very fabric of our societies, which is the nuclear family. So we thank you for listening and supporting us. Until next time on Say What?
You've been listening to Say What, the radio ministry of Protect Our Kids, where they seek to inform and equip concerned citizens about the crisis in American public education and the forces working against our children. Join us at this same time every Saturday as attorney Mark Schneider and Pastor George Rosca Jr. unpack the issues so that we can better safeguard our nation's children. And join Mark and George right here next week at this same time for another episode of Say What.